Good afternoon. My name is Daria Orlowska. I am the data librarian, and with me as a helper is Jason Glatz. He's the map specialist, and he's going to be helping us out with questions today. This workshop is being recorded as a resource for all of you to access later, for those who can't make it, and for anyone who's watching in the future. If you do not feel comfortable being part of the recording, please use the chat and I will monitor it. Jason will also monitor it, and he will be able to read out your questions. So today we will be exploring data literacy from the viewpoint of existing data within Excel. In this workshop, we will be using a sample research question to consider how identified secondary data fits our needs, how that data needs to be prepared for analysis, and how Excel functionalities can be leveraged for cleaning and analyzing your data. While we won't have time to cover all Excel capabilities, because we would be here all day, and we won't be getting into visualizations, I hope that this demonstration will allow you to get started with some of your own data projects. But first, before we begin, it would be nice to find out some of your background with Excel and what you hope to get out of this workshop. If you could please go to menti.com and type in that code. I will also paste a link in chat if you would like to go there directly, or you can go ahead and scan that QR code, whatever is easier for you, just to give me some information. The first question is how familiar you are with Excel. Have you never used it before? Have you only used it for viewing data? Have you entered data into Excel, or have you conducted some analyses? And that will give me a sense of where you're starting from. And then there's a second question, which is what are you hoping to see today? That will help me kind of get a sense of if there's anything I should be covering or if anything I should be focusing on today. So if you could please do that, I would appreciate it. And I will pull up what the responses are right here so we can kind of look at them together. So it looks like nobody here has never used Excel, which is great. So we have some sort of background, and then some varying experience with what you've used Excel for in the past. So some people here have used it for more like analyses, which is great. Hopefully you will learn some shortcuts and some tips if you've never used it for analyses before, but you've created graphs. Hopefully we'll get something out of this as well. Okay. And then I'm going to proceed to the next question here. Okay, so some of the things that people are looking for are more in-depth understanding. Yep. Some advanced analytic techniques, lots of data analysis, great. Just what the title of the workshop is. Some refresher and new tips and tricks, definitely. Yes, these are all things that we will hopefully cover. And at any point that things are not clear, you are more than welcome to ask those questions. And although this is an online workshop and it is not as hands-on as if it was in person, we will do our best to try to address your questions. Okay, great. Thank you so much for participating. If you hadn't had a chance to participate, feel free to go to that link later on and let me know so that I can have a sense of who you are as a group. So next, I'm going to proceed to what we hope to learn from this workshop. So during this workshop, we will touch on the following goals. What you need to get out of a data project might be different from what a data set can provide you, especially if you are reusing data. Therefore, it's important to consider what transformation and cleaning is required to better align those two things together so you can work within the confines of what data you have available. The second goal is identifying the Excel tools to prepare data sets for analyses. Excel has a number of different tools, and today I will specifically show formulas and functionalities to manipulate your data set. Like I said, we're not using any We're not showing how to create any graphs today, but we are showing a little bit about cleaning and analysis. Employ data management best practices. While we were doing manipulations, I will highlight some best practices around managing your data to help you be more organized and set yourself up for success during your project. And finally, we will look at data sets critically, contextualizing our findings around the data set limitations, and discussing how next steps can be tackled. So, like I mentioned before, since virtual workshops are notoriously difficult to gauge how you are doing, there's typically not a lot of interaction. That's fine. This is a demonstration, but it would be helpful if you could do one of two things for me. First, feel free to type in your questions into the chat or message Jason Glatz, who is our helper, directly. If I don't see them, Jason will help me read out the questions. Like I said, this workshop is being recorded, therefore you don't have to read them out yourself. If you are comfortable with reading out your questions yourself, feel free to unmute yourself and you can ask me those questions directly. I will try to pause and for questions after each section. Secondly, if you don't feel like asking a question, which is perfectly fine, it would be great if you could let me know how you're feeling using emotes. So specifically, I would like you to use the rabbit emote and the turtle emote. The rabbit emote is telling me I am all good, please move on to the next thing, and the turtle is letting me know that I should repeat a certain concept or that you maybe missed something. So if you could do one of those two things, that would be great. If you could put rabbit emotes in chat that you understood what's going on and you're ready to move on, that would be awesome. Yep, awesome, great. Thank you so much for playing along. You also received a companion worksheet as part of this workshop. Feel free to fill it out as you go along or fill it out afterwards to test your knowledge. The answers to the question are included in like the supplementary file that is also uploaded into the Google Doc the Google folder that we will be going over later. And there are some screenshots also that I've uploaded that will help you, as well as this recording to refresh your memory if we don't get to something or if you want to go over it again. It is possible we won't get to everything today, unfortunately. If that is the case, I am sure you will have the resources to go over it yourself. I will also be here for an hour after this workshop. If you have any questions about things we missed, or if you'd like me to repeat anything. Okay, any questions at this point? Are we feeling good? Yes? Okay. And with that, hearing nothing, seeing rabbits, thank you so much. I appreciate that. I will move on to the next thing. Okay.
So Daria, before you go on,
Sure.
I don't know if this is because I'm a co-host, but I'm seeing the you're sharing this screen bar at the top of your presentation thing.
Okay, how about now?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Jason. Okay, so the first section is project needs. So let's say you were interested in how the weather was different now than it was over 100 years ago. This is going to be our big research question for this workshop so we can structure it. We've all seen graphs of the rising ocean temperatures over time, but is there a way for us to find weather data from the beginning of this graph, you see 1880 right here, to compare it to weather that we're currently experiencing now? Maybe when we set out to answer this question, we're interested in looking at lots of things that are currently available for weather data. Maybe we're interested in like average temperatures or extreme weather events, or just to determine how global warming may have impacted us. And so if we set out with this research question, we go out into the world and actually find the data we're interested in, we can find lots of websites that provide us with every single contemporary piece of weather data that we want. However, we find that maybe these websites don't go as far back in time as we want them to. In fact, if you look at these drop downs, the earliest time is 1930, but even that is deceiving. There's actually no weather data in 1930 for that website. If you click on it, it's just blank. It says that the data doesn't exist. So the earliest piece of weather data is actually the 1970s. So what do we do with that information, right? We have to maybe look for a different source. NOAA, uh, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, offers some data from the late 1890s, but the interface is a little bit difficult to navigate. And if you do find aggregated data that's within a spreadsheet that's compiled already, it requires some cleaning before it can be used. But we do have an in-house solution here. We have the South Haven Lighthouse logs, which you see pictured on the screen on the left-hand side. Those have been digitized and are available as transcribed data sets. This data is what the data set that we're going to be using today to look at the historical data, because it goes back to 1878, which is kind of what we were interested in. And it is a log of passing vessels and remarks made by a lighthouse keeper. However, if you look at it, I don't know how many of you read cursive, but if you look at this digitized version of the lighthouse log, you see something that says remarks, and it has information like rain and cloudy, wind, gale. And that doesn't really tell us, it kind of gives us a general information about the weather, but it doesn't provide very concrete weather information like the kind we can get from contemporary weather data. It doesn't tell us the amount of snowfall. And so we need to realign our expectations. If you've ever tried to combine secondary data, which is data that's collected for a different purpose and is being reused by you, you will know that you're always limited by the least specific piece of information in our data set. I'm sure that many of you have seen census data, which looks at things maybe by the county or by the state. And so you're always limited by the fact that you can't go down to the individual level, right? You can't look, that's like you have to stay at the level of information that is provided to you. In that case, we're limited by geography. In this case, we're limited by the granularity of information collection. In the contemporary data, as I've mentioned, we know how much snow has fallen each day, maybe in inches, but that information is not available in our data set. Therefore, we will be using the presence of snow on a given date as a comparison across time. So we're going to be saying that since snow maybe is correlated with how cold something is, and cold days can indicate maybe like extreme weather if there's more cold days within a year. Global warming may affect us in the sense that we're experiencing very hot days and maybe very cold days. We're going to use that as a proxy. So just looking at the presence or absence of snow within the historical data set. Okay, so before we begin actually diving into these data sets, we're just going to look really quickly at just to see what we're working with here. So this is the historical data that I was talking about, the lighthouse logs, and it's put into a data set. It was curated here at the libraries, which means that someone looked at it and put the data into the column and documented it. And if you look at this data set here, you can ask the question, does it need to be prepared for analysis? And you should do that with all the data that you have, whether it's data you're working for that's within your department, whether it's for a project, whether it's something you're collecting for yourself, or if you found it somewhere else, how does it need to be prepared? In this case, we see that there is you see numbers, ones, to indicate the presence or absence of a certain type of weather. So that information has already been drawn out for us, and it could be very easy for us to count the number of days of snow. We also see that we have columns A, B, and C here, which are used for year, month, and day. The reason we're seeing those separated out, whereas some data sets may not separate those out, might treat them as one piece of information, is because these are still 3 pieces of information. And for historical data sets like this, Excel actually does not recognize anything before 1900 as a date. So the dates are usually split out like this when working with things before 1900 because Excel is not going to recognize them as a date anyway. And this is actually beneficial if you are working with anyone who might be from a different country, who might use a different date convention than you use. They might be using day, month, year. This makes it very obvious when you see 1878 July 1st, you're not going to have any guesswork about what date that happened on. Okay, moving on to the second data set. This is our contemporary data set. This was taken from the WeatherSpark website. And we're not going to go to it now, but if you go onto the website, typically you just have a few different rows with weather information. It was just copied and pasted into this spreadsheet. Some things that jump out to me right away is that because these were just copied and pasted from the website, if we look at the date, we actually don't have a year here. So that is something we're going to have to fill in order to manipulate this information. We also see here that we have observations, but these observations are a string of text in one cell. So we don't have, it's not divided up the same way that our historical data set was divided up, where snow, we had like the presence or absence of snow in that data set. So we're going to have to extract that information in order to do some sort of analysis on this data set. Any questions about either of those two? We good to go? Please send me rabbits if you're good to go, or if you'd like me to explain something again, please send turtles.
Can I ask a question really quick?
Yes, of course.
So where do these two sets of data come from? Like, I understand that they're similar.
Mhm.
Well, I'm looking at the dates and they're different, but like why are they different? I understand one's from a lighthouse, but I don't know where the other one is from.
The other one is contemporary data. So the other one is from 2018 to 2022. And the first
Okay.
one is from 1878 to 1882. And so it's like 150-year difference. And so we want to look at the historical data and compare it to the contemporary to see if we can see if there's any climate change, essentially. That's our mock research question for this workshop. Does that help?
Yeah. I just think
Okay.
it's interesting that like the older data looks, well, like just to like my untrained eyes, it like looks more scientific because they've got everything out into like presence versus absence, whereas the newer data is just like they sort of wrote a description.
Yeah, so this older data is actually from these lighthouse logs, which you see right here on the left-hand side. So it's all digitized and handwritten. And then we actually had a team here at the libraries who looked at these digitized logs and then coded all that information
Oh,
and
that's so
made
cool.
sure, yeah, and made sure it was clean and ready for reuse. And that's why it looks cleaner, because
Okay.
there was a team of people working on it. Yes.
All right. And then the data on the right, that's just like straight from some database that hasn't been like cleaned up.
And this data right here for the contemporary data is straight from a weather website. And it's just how they presented that data. And so we copied and pasted it into a spreadsheet, and this is what it looks like right now. And we need
Okay.
to clean it before we can use it.
Okay, cool. That's all.
Okay, great. Thank you for asking. So yeah, so now what we need to do is we need to define what we want to do with our project, right? We have these two data sets. We have our historical data set and we have our contemporary data set. What are we hoping to get from them? Like, what is our output going to look like? Well, we know we're interested in snow, right? We're interested in presence or absence for both of those data sets. We're also interested in date because we're comparing things across time. So we'll probably need year, month, and day, right? And or even like in order to condense it down, perhaps instead of looking at each day individually, we want to sum those snow days into the amount of snow days per month to make some comparisons across the year. So we can visualize this as creating perhaps a table that looks something like this, where you have the months that are one column, so going from January to December, because all years have the same months, and then having those 5 years from the historical data set, 1878 to 1882, and those 5 years from the contemporary data set, 2018 to 2022. And hopefully, if we have the sum of snow days for each of those, we can make some conclusions. So that's what we're hoping to get at the end of this workshop, something that fills in this spreadsheet, and we need to do some cleaning, including isolating dates with snow, combining those spreadsheets, and doing some cleaning for the dates for the contemporary data sets, as well as complicating things so that I can show you what you can do with this data in case you didn't have things coded, such as snow. Okay, are we feeling okay so far? Ready to move on? Please send rabbits if you are ready to move on. Please ask questions if you have questions at this point. Great. So now what we're going to do is we're going to get to the demonstration portion of this. And in order to do that, we need to first download our data. So to do that, hopefully you see my browser window, and we want to go to tinyurl.com, should spell it right, /WMU-Excel. And you're going to type that into the address bar at the top and not within the Google search. Jason, if I know sent it out, if you could send it out again, Jason, so people can click on it. But if you've typed it into your address bar, you should end up in this Google Drive. And what we're going to do is we're going to download both of these Excel spreadsheets. If you're playing along at home and want to do this with me, feel free to download them. If you're here just to look, that's also fine. So we're going to download both of these, this first one and the second one. Okay. And the first thing we want to do once we've actually downloaded this is we want to put it somewhere where we can easily access it. In this case, I'm going to create a new folder on the desktop that says Excel Workshop. And the reason I'm putting both of these in to the renamed folder is so that I can easily find it later on. So I don't have to look through and be like, where did I download it? Where did I put it? So by going ahead and putting into its own dedicated folder in an easy to find space, that is a great data management tip. So now we have both of our spreadsheets, and we're going to look at the names really quickly before we get started. Do these names make sense to us? In this case, there it says data, which is great. It has which one is contemporary, which one is historical, and it has the year. So maybe this is very legible for us, but oftentimes when we're downloading secondary data, it can be it might not have been renamed. It might be just a combination of letters and numbers, in which case I would urge you to rename it so that you know what you're dealing with later on. And the other thing we're going to do before we get started is we're actually going to make a copy of these. So we're going to copy and paste them. And the reason I'm making a copy is so that I can rename it, and I can rename one to just say raw. The reason for this is that oftentimes when you are dealing with data and you're making manipulations to it, you will find that you may have overwritten your raw data, and maybe you accidentally did something that you didn't mean to do. And even if you're downloading your secondary data, it might be hard to find what the data set you were working with. So really just keeping a copy of raw data that you're not going to touch, but that you can reference in case you need to, is a good practice. So we could even rename the ones that we are going to touch as analysis, just to make it really easy for us. You don't have to, but I am going to do it for the purposes of this workshop, just so that we know which ones we're going to open and which ones we're going to work with. Okay, so we're going to first open the Lighthouse log data sets. So when you open things within Excel, you are always going to want to enable editing at the top, or else you're not going to be able to do anything. So make sure you're doing that. And the first thing we're going to do is kind of what we did for the spreadsheets, where we made a copy, and one of them is going to be our raw data. For the purposes of this workshop, we are going to have a raw data sheet within this spreadsheet, just because I'm going to demonstrate in certain things, and I'm going to keep creating sheets so they don't get confused. So I'm going to put up this magnifying tool so that you can see, because I know this is really small. So at the bottom of your spreadsheet, you have this, it says Lighthouse on logs, and that's your sheet. And right now we only have one, but if you double click on that, you can rename it to whatever you want. I'm going to rename this to raw data. And if you click enter, it just saves. And I'm going to create a copy of it. So I'm going to right click on the sheet and select move or copy. And I'm going to create a copy and move it to the end and press OK. And then I have something that says raw data 2, and I'm going to rename it to sum, because that's going to be the first thing that we focus on within the workshop. Okay, so you have sheets at the bottom. You can make as many copies as you want. I just essentially just made a copy. I'm going to get rid of this magnifying tool. So yeah, so here we are. We're let's make this a little bit bigger so we can see what we're working with. Okay. So the first thing that we might want to do with our spreadsheet is to actually see how many snow days are within the historical data. And there's a few ways that you can do that. The first way to do it is, because we have this column that says snow, it's blank right now. That's because we're in July of 1878, and there typically does not snow in July. If it did, I think we might all be very concerned. But if we scroll down to December, you see that you have ones for presence of snow. And you can see that it matches with the remarks here. So snow and cloudy, wind fresh, presence of snow. So the first way to find out the count of snow is that Excel actually has a built-in counter that will tell you how many that will count how many cells within a given range. So the way to do that is you select the entire column M, that has snow. And here at the bottom, let me put on the magnifying tool again, which is plus. Yeah, sorry, it's very small at the bottom, and I can't unfortunately increase the size. But if you scroll down to the very bottom of your spreadsheet, you have you can see here, average 1, count 100, sum 99. So there are 99 instances of snow days within the spreadsheet. The reason count and sum are not the same is because count counts the header, which is says snow, so that's not actually a snow day. If you are not seeing that AutoSum function, you can right click on the bottom toolbar and you can select what you want to see. So average, count, minimal, maximum, sum. So it might not be checked mark within your browser or within your Excel spreadsheet. So right here, let me exit out. Okay. And so that's not the only way to do it. That is the quickest way to do so. There are other options to sum your data within Excel. So you could do AutoSum, but if you click AutoSum, it ends up, where did it go? I'm not actually sure where it went. So it might be easy to lose track of. And the way to quickly navigate to the bottom of your range is to go Control End, and that will bring you to the last row with your data. So I selected the entire column and I clicked AutoSum, and I don't actually know where that went. So let's try that again. If I go to the bottom of this sheet, of this column, and I click AutoSum, you can see here that it AutoSums to 1. And the reason for that is because what it's doing is it's scrolling up and encountering the first data point right here and returning 1 because there's too many spaces within our data set. There's too many blanks and it doesn't know what to do. Excel is only as good as the information you provide in there. So if we look right here at the top within this formula bar, we see sum M1176 to M1256. You should have, I see a question, one sec. If within your screen, there should be a zoom functionality within WebEx. So if you don't see it very clearly, feel free to zoom in. Yes, go ahead.
Would the issue with AutoSum be fixed if the blanks were turned into zeros?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it should be fixed. But a lot of times, individuals might choose to keep things blank as opposed to 0 because it might mean that it was not available, as opposed to I looked at it and I counted 0 instances, if that makes sense. So different disciplines might treat zeros and blanks differently. So, I mean, I guess you could replace all the blanks with zeros, but you could also change the range criteria. So in this case, you can change it to 2. And that will start the range at row 2, which if you scroll all the way up is where your data range starts. And if I go to control end, I have the end of the data range and I can find this sum again. You could do this technically anywhere. You don't have to do it within this column. You could decide, oh yeah, I want to do the sum of this column. I want to create AutoSum, and I want to select this column M to M and select enter, and oh, it gave me more. Can anyone, if it gave me 198, the reason it gave me 198 is because I did the sum here, and so it is now taking the sum that was of the snow days and the sum that I already calculated, and maybe even the AutoSum that I did earlier that I didn't know where it went, and is summing everything together now. So summing is great. Using a formula can be very convenient, but you have to be very careful when you're mixing your raw data with your analyses, because it is very easy to double sum numbers. It is very easy to forget that there was a sum somewhere, an analysis somewhere within your raw data. And if you export it out somewhere else to a different program, the computer will think that is another data point. So just something to be really mindful of if you're combining raw data analyses. Yes, we have another question. Go ahead.
So with the AutoSum feature, you said
Yes.
you turned something to 2 rather than 1 and that fixed it. How did you do that? I couldn't see exactly what we did in your spreadsheet.
Oh, sure. So let me delete this. And let me get the magnifying tool out. Right here. Within this range. So initially, I think this was like, and if you click on it, it will tell you what the range of the data is, but I think it was like 1178 or something. So it wasn't the full range of that data set. So it wasn't the full column. So because we know that the first data point within this spreadsheet starts at row number 2, that's because row number 1 is a header. If you changed that number to 2, it would get the entire range. Alternatively, you could just get rid of the numbers and you can do M to M. That will give you just the entire range of the column. And it will give you the same number. Hello. Oh, it didn't like it because it's self-referential. So because I selected the entire column with the sum being right below it, it is now referencing itself because it is the next data point underneath it. And so it's giving me 0. It doesn't want to actually sum it. So in order for me to do that, for that to work, I would have to go to place that sum function in a different column that is not right below my data. So in this case, sum m to m. There you go, 99. Any other questions? Okay, if you are good to go, if you would like me to proceed, please put rabbits into as a reaction and I will keep going on. I will get rid of this magnification tool. Escape. As you know, I don't know if you've noticed, there is a little box that's popping up at the bottom right of my screen that's showing you all the shortcuts I'm using. Some of these shortcuts are specifically for the magnifying tool, which is using the Windows plus and then the Windows escape. But I will try to speak out loud when I'm using an Excel shortcut. Okay, so this is all fine and dandy. But what happens if we don't actually have this column? What if we were not provided with a column that gives us the presence or absence of snow? What if all that we had was the remarks column, which gives us information about the weather, but does not provide us with presence or absence? So we could get this information. We can find that ourselves. So let's go ahead and do that. There's a few ways for us to do it. So I'm going to go back into raw data at the bottom as the sheet, and I'm going to make another copy. So move or copy, move to end and create a copy. And I'm going to call this one formatting. So the first way that we can identify the presence or absence of snow, if we didn't have all of this information here, is that we can use conditional formatting to let us know whether snow appears within the text here. Actually, let's rewind back. Let's first say that we want to use conditional formatting within this number, seeing the presence or absence. So leveraging this first before we move on to here. So the way that we use conditional formatting within a spreadsheet is we first select the range that we're interested in. If we select the entire data set, it will apply the conditional formatting to all the data. In this case, let's go ahead and select column M, that's snow. And where's my magnifying tool again? This is a little bit small. So I'm selecting this entire column. And then I'm going into the conditional formatting in the ribbon under Home, in the sub ribbon Styles, and using this drop-down menu to go into the quick options. And so we can go ahead and highlight cell rules if it is equal to 1. And once we have things set equal to 1, we can press OK. And we see that all the ones have been highlighted within our data set. Okay. And now, in order to, because we need to scroll all the way down to find the rest of the ones, and that's not super helpful, we can sort on this data set using this conditional formatting. So first, what we need to do is we need to select our entire data range. I don't know how many of you have used Excel extensively, but if we only kept this as our data range, what would end up happening is if we sorted, we would sort just this column. And so this column would become separated from the data in the rest of our data set. So we don't want to do that because then we're going to have to start all over. Luckily, we have a raw spreadsheet that we could start all over from, but if you didn't create that, you would have a lot of things to figure out first. So first we want to select our entire data range. There's 2 ways to do that. I'm sure there's more than 2 ways. But the first way is you can use this little corner on the top left to select the entire spreadsheet. And you can see it extends beyond our data set, or you can do Control A to select just your data range. Either of those work perfectly fine for our purposes. And so now with our data range selected, we go into the ribbon here and we go to the Data tab and we choose Sort. And we have this window that pops up. So the first thing that we need to do is make sure that my data has headers is checked marked. You can do it without checking this off, but your data has headers. It will be easier to sort if you know what your columns are named. We can sort by this snow column. And instead of sorting on cell values, which I guess you could do in this case, it won't be helpful for the next case, but you could sort on cell values, but we've used conditional formatting. So we can sort on cell colors. And then we just need to make sure that the order has the light red on top. And we press OK. And then if we navigate to the top of our spreadsheet, we see that all the cells that have presence or absence of snow are at the top. We can do this with more than just numbers. We can also do it with words. So if you did not have this column that already had presence or absence of snow, we could repeat the same function with this remarks column by doing the same order of operations. So first selecting column D, which has the remarks, then going into Home, Conditional Formatting, and highlighting cell rules. But instead of using equal to, we're going to press text that contains. In this case, we can put in snow. And as you see in the background, all of these cells have helpfully highlighted for us. And that's because we've already sorted our data set, so they all appear at the top. This is not case sensitive. So if I put in snow, it should all highlight. And it just matches if the formula finds the word snow within the cell. So it is not the entire cell contents. There is a way to do that. It is just not within the quick menu. So if we press OK again, you see that all our snow is highlighted. And if we hadn't sorted the data, we could do the same thing where we sort on this column. If we ever want to modify our conditional formatting formulas, we can click the drop-down menu for conditional formatting and we can click Manage Rules. And then we see what is selected. So right now I have column D selected, which is why this is the only formula that shows up. And you can edit the rule to change things if you wanted to. If you click out of that selection and you click Conditional Format and Manage Rules, you can select this worksheet and you will see both of the conditional formatting that you have created. So is this a good strategy? The reason it works very well for us, especially to find the data we're interested in. But if we didn't have this column with presence or absence of snow, and all we had is the year, month, date, and remarks, this could actually be problematic if we want to export this data into a different program, or if we want to share this data set with colleagues in maybe an open format, like a CSV. A CSV is a comma-separated values file, and I say open format because it is independent of any software. So right now we're using Excel, which means if we're saving the spreadsheet, it's going to save as a .xlsx. That's a proprietary format. It's something that Excel can open. Other software at this point can open it, but the formatting might be off, or any formulas that you put in could be incorrect. So if you are going to share this with someone else, it is best practice to save it as a CSV document. Unfortunately, a CSV not only gets rid of all the sheets that you have, so it only exports as one sheet, it will get rid of all the formatting you have done, all the conditional formatting, all the bolding, all your formulas. And so you will not actually have any of these instances of snow highlighted within the document that you export. So that's just something to keep in mind, that if you want to extract this information, this might not be the best method for you. However, it is a good method maybe to quickly get a sense of what data you have within your spreadsheet. Does anyone have any questions for me at this point? Please tell me if you're ready to move on with rabbits. Or feel free to speak up or message Jason if you have any questions. Okay, great. I'm going to get rid of my magnifying tool again. There we go. So we've gone through formatting. So if formatting is not the best way for us to extract this information, because if we save it or export it to a different formatting, we will lose that information. We can do something else with this data. Maybe we can replicate this presence or absence column. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new sheet. So I'm going to go down to raw data and right click and select move or copy, move to end and create a copy. And this one we're going to rename to COUNTIF. Okay. So if we only have these remarks columns, we can use a formula called a COUNTIF formula to tell us what the presence or absence of certain criteria within a cell is. So COUNTIF formula, let me go ahead and pull this up so I can write, looks like this. You always start with an equal sign for a formula. So if you don't start with that, you're not actually going to input a formula into Excel. And when you start typing in a formula name, it will pre-populate within Excel, but I'm using this for demonstration purposes. An COUNTIF formula is a conditional formula that takes two pieces of information in. The first one is your range or location, and then you have a comma to separate that out, and then you have your criteria. So in this case, your range is going to be a single cell, right? Because we're replicating what we see, which is the presence or absence. So we're going to, for this first cell, for this first row of data, which is D2, rain and cloudy, wind fresh, we're going to see if there's a presence or absence of snow. So we would do our range here would be D2, this first cell, and then our criteria would be the words snow. However, because snow is words, it is not a numerical criteria. We actually need to put quotes around it to let Excel know that we're looking for specific words. If we actually go ahead and do this, which if I navigate out and create a new column here, let's call this COUNTIF so that I know what I'm doing. Count, see, I start typing in COUNTIF and it pre-populates the formula. So I can click it and it will do the parentheses for me. And it will tell me that first it takes a range. And so our range here is a single cell, like we said, D2. I can click it or I can type it. Either way, it will always highlight it for me. The trick is, before writing in the next part, is to put in a comma, because if I click in any other place, it's going to auto update the reference, which later on you will see might be problematic if you click around somewhere else, especially if you're working between sheets or if you have multiple criteria you're looking for. In this case, you were just doing D2. We're putting in the comma and we're doing quotes and we're typing in snow. However, we see 0, which makes sense in this case. What we're going to do is we're going to apply the formula all the way down the cells. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to navigate our cursor. See how it is an open, like a white cross at this point? We're going to navigate it to the bottom right of this cell until it turns into a black cross. And maybe I should go ahead and do this magnifying tool. So it's a white cross right now. Now it turns into a black cross. And once you see that black cross, if you double click, it applies it all the way down wherever you have data. Okay. However, if we actually go and verify our work, right, maybe we want to make sure that it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. Sanity checks are always good. So we go to find the first instance of snow. So we have snow here. However, we see that their count is still 0. And the reason for that is that we're asking it to find snow, but the COUNTIF formula takes that to mean look into this cell that we're looking at here. Oh, I'm going to pause here. So it seems like there's an error message and not a formula. So you want to make sure you start with an equal sign, and you want to make sure you spelled COUNTIF correctly. So COUNTIF, and you have a parentheses. Yes. Make sure that, because if you're spelling it incorrectly, it will probably put up an error message. Same if you missed a comma, or if you missed quotes and you're dealing with a word. But anyway, as I was saying, everything is correct, but the formula isn't working. Okay. I will finish what I'm explaining and then we will loop back. So if we go and scroll back up to this first instance, how did you apply all the cells? Yes. Let me undo this. So I'm going to re-show how I did this. Okay. So I'm typing in count if, and you will see that Excel will start auto-populating the formula for us. So we want COUNTIF, and then we're saying our range is D2, and then we go ahead and we type in snow. And now we navigate our cursor. The quotes are for designating that this is text. You don't need quotes if you're saying look for the number 1, because it is a number. However, if you're dealing with text, you always have to put quotes around it. And then you're navigating your cursor to where it becomes, yeah. If you don't use a comma and you use a different punctuation, it will not be happy with you. So you're navigating your cursor till it becomes a black cross, and you're double clicking to apply it all the way down. Is the text within the quotes case sensitive? I want to say we will try this out. But right now it's not working. And the reason it's not working is because if we navigate down to where there is snow, we are saying look at this cell and the entire thing needs to match to snow. And that's not the case. We're never going to get the entire thing matching to snow because we're only looking at a piece of information within that cell. So we need to introduce wildcards. Wildcards are essentially Excel's way to say, it doesn't matter what appears in front of this word. It doesn't matter what appears maybe behind this word. You can put wildcards before or after. Just see if this word appears within the cell. So we need to modify our formula. So we need to scroll up. Let's go and click that first one. And instead of having just quote snow, we're going to put asterisks in front and in behind our word. The reason it's in front or behind is because snow can appear at the it doesn't have to appear at the very beginning of that cell within the remarks column. It might appear in the middle. And so we don't care what appears before it, and we don't care what appears after it. We just care for the word snow. And I don't think this is actually case sensitive, because if you scroll down below, I think it has snow in capital S later on, but we can double check this. So anyway, we changed our formula. I pressed enter and it shifted this formula down. But now we need to reapply it because it's changed within this first cell, but it still just quotes snow in the rest. So we need to go ahead and we need to click on this first cell where we have a black cross, and we need to double click all the way down. And now if we find an entry that had snow, 1, we see that 1 also appears when we apply this new formula all the way down. Can I set the cell blank if the COUNTIF result is 0? Yes, but not within the COUNTIF formula. That actually brings us to our next part of the workshop, but I'm going to pause for a second to see if anyone has any questions about this first part. So there's, I can get rid of this, Control Escape. So we found out that we have a COUNTIF formula that will tell us presence or absence of a cell. We put in the range. We need to put wildcards around the word, and we need to put quotes around the word in order for it to work. If you're good, please place rabbits into chat. I see some of you have already started doing that to let me know that you're ready to move on. Okay, great. And the next, if we want maybe no 1s and 0s, because maybe we think that the 0s are really distracting, right? Like it's really hard to find the 1s. There is a way to do that. Unfortunately, we can't use the COUNTIF formula because that's what the COUNTIF formula defaults to. What we're going to need to use is an if formula. An if formula takes, similar to COUNTIF, a criteria, except it is in the format. You have a criteria that you need to set, and then you have to put in what you would like Excel to show if the criteria is true or if the criteria is false. So maybe in this case, if it's true, we want it to show 1, but if it's false, we want it to show 0, or we could leave it blank, or maybe if it's true, we want it to show yes, and false, no. This is a great way if you don't want 1s and 0s. However, an if formula is tricky because it doesn't work with wildcards. So usually if you have numbers here, it will work really well. It's not going to work well for our case. So what we need to do is we need to actually take what we developed within the COUNTIF formula, and we need to stick it in the criteria. So it's going to read, if this COUNTIF formula is true, put yes. If it's false, put no, or keep it blank, right? So we're going to go ahead and see how it works. So we're going to title this column if, and we're going to scroll all the way down, all the way up to the top of our range. Don't start in the middle of your range because you're going to have to apply the formula up and down. And so what we're going to do is we're going to start typing equal sign. We're going to write in if, open quotes, and then we're going to paste in essentially our COUNTIF formula here. Our logic test is what it's helpfully telling us. Magnifying tool, Daria. There you go. Now you can see a little bit better, hopefully. So our logic formula is COUNTIF, and we're doing the same exact thing you just did. So our range is D2. Make sure you're putting in the comma before you move on to the criteria. Our criteria is snow. You're putting parentheses, you're putting quotes, a wildcard, the word snow. Your wildcard again, quotes. You're closing your parentheses, and then you're putting a comma. Now, what's your true value? Maybe you want your true value just to be yes. It's another word, so you need to put quotes around it. Yes. Maybe you don't want it to display anything if it's false. You could do no, but you could also leave it blank and just close your parentheses. And if you press enter, you will see it's applied for here. This doesn't tell us anything because there's no snow in July. We need to apply this formula down. Oh, I guess it defaults to 0. In order to change it to blank, we need to do 2 quotes with nothing in them. Okay. So instead of putting no, you could put no if you'd like, but you could just do 2 quotes and then it will be blank. So now you see no information is showing up. If we apply it all the way down, there's no information until we get to snow, and then we see yes. Any questions? Great, so I am going to keep moving along. So we've done a COUNTIF formula to replicate the snow column. We've also figured out we could do an if formula if we want to designate exactly what we want it to display. However, if we wanted to sort on this information, I don't know if I'm not going to ask any open-ended questions in a webinar, unfortunately, but what happens if I went ahead and sorted on this column? Because it is a formula that references a specific cell within the row, it will become scrambled. It will not actually sort properly. So the way to sort, if you have a formula, is you first need to change your columns into from formula to value. So the way that we would do that is I'm just going to do it for the sake of demonstration. I'm going to copy this entire column. I'm going to go over to column R, and I'm going to paste 1, 2, 3. This will paste values. So now if I go ahead and click on yes, you see that there is no formula that appears within the formula bar. So if I go ahead and do the lens again, there is no formula that appears within the formula bar. Whereas if I click into the one next to it, there is a formula. So now there is nothing that is referencing it, and I can sort on this column, and my references won't get messed up. However, what this does, unfortunately, is it removes the formula. So maybe you want to know what formula you use to get a certain result, and in order to actually sort, you need to get rid of it. The best way to solve for this issue is, if you need to do this, is to document things. My documentation software of choice is Notepad++. It's like Notepad where it's plain text, but it auto-saves my files, and sometimes I'm really bad at saving files, and if I close it, it will always be there. But if I just take this formula and I copy it and put it within Notepad++ and say something like column R uses the formula, and then it has this formula in order to obtain absence or presence of snow, then you have things documented for yourself, even if you need to get rid of the formula in order to sort. Okay. So if I actually went and sorted by this if column, just to, oh, see, I changed the reference. It's very easy to do that within Excel as well. So if I press tab, if I actually went and sorted by this column and went to data, which I don't encourage you to do, it's going to say you need to expand the selection. It's trying to prevent you from doing harm to yourself. And let's expand the selection. And if we sorted by the first if column, or let's just sort by COUNTIF. on cell values, largest to smallest, it shouldn't work very well. Did this actually work? Usually it does not work. Usually it breaks. So I would strongly suggest you don't do it. In this case, it worked. Usually it does not. Don't sort on things that reference other cells because it's not going to turn out well most of the time. Okay. Delimited. Okay. So there's a comment within the chat that is suggesting that maybe you are using Excel for the question about having to use semicolons instead of commas. Maybe you are opening Excel within a different format. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's a CSV, which I don't understand why it would be a CSV, but we'll explore that some other time. Okay. Moving on. See here. So what we've done, yeah, it is possible that Excel on the web page versus on the desktop version is slightly different. I don't know why it would be this different, but maybe something to explore after the workshop. Okay, so what we have done is we have replicated ways to go ahead and create this column M, essentially, if we didn't have this column and all we had are the remarks. And so now we want to sum all the snow within a month. So like, what's the best way for us to go ahead and do that? I guess we could go in and be like, okay, well, we know when each of the months are actually happening, right? If we go back maybe into this sum column, we have July. We know when the last of July is. Maybe I'm gonna go ahead and create a column here and then just go ahead and sum all these cells, right, to get a sum. However, that's maybe not the best approach in our case if we're mixing again analyses with raw data, because it will be very hard to find where your sums are to just navigating along going down the spreadsheet. It's also going to be very difficult to separate your raw data from your analyses if you ever export it to something else. So instead, it's better to do is create a new sheet. We're going to go ahead and press this plus. So it's blank. So the way that I did that is I've navigated down to the sheets at the bottom, and I just clicked this little plus, which creates a new sheet. And I'm going to rename this analysis. And this is where we're going to actually do our analyses so that it is separate from our raw data. And you actually have most of the components to do this at this point. And if you think back to our initial discussion when we set up the project, we talked about doing months and years in order to compare the sum of those, a sum of snow within months. So let's set it up here. Let's start off with January. That's our first month. Excel actually has a functionality that allows you to drag and drop and fill things in. And months are one of the inputs that have been inputted into a list, so you can just drag it down to get all the months automatically instead of typing it in yourself. Okay, so we have months in the A column, and then we're going to fill in the years. We have 1878 as our first year, and we have 5 years of this, and we're going to put it right now. It's just copying it over. If you go ahead and click the little input that showed up and you press fill series, it should auto-populate the years for you so you don't have to type them in manually. So right now you have, I can go ahead and zoom in so you can see a little bit more clearly, and probably get rid of this escape lens. Oh, okay. Let me click out of it this way. Magnifier. Okay, so now you have your month set up in your column A and your year set up in row 1. And we used a COUNTIF formula to look for the criteria of something and then count it, right? We can use the same sort of formula in order to find the amount of snow in, say, January 1878. Except we're taking several pieces of criteria. So if I go ahead and go into my Paint document, instead of a COUNTIF formula, we're going to be using a COUNTIFS formula. The only difference between a COUNTIF and a COUNTIFS is the S and how much criteria it takes. So if you remember, a COUNTIF takes your range, so where that data is located, and then the criteria, so what are you looking for within that range. A COUNTIFS formula essentially does the same thing, except it does it for multiple pieces of information. So you have your first range, your first criteria, and then your second range and your second criteria, so on and so forth. You can do this for unlimited amounts of criteria. In this case, we have our month. So our first criteria is going to be January, right? And we're going to find the words January within the range raw data. We're going to find the exact column that it corresponds to. And if you remember back into the spreadsheet, we had year, month, day. So it's probably going to be column B, right? Look in column B and find all the instances of January. We're not going to need to put wildcards around it because the month, the name of the month is the only piece of information within that cell. Okay, and our second piece of criteria is going to be the year, 1872. So in this case, we're going to go into raw data and we're going to be looking at column A. And we're going to be looking for 1878, sorry. I don't think you actually need to put quotes around it. Did I put quotes around it? No. Okay. It's not going to matter because we're going to use references, but we're looking for 1878 and it's a number, so you don't need to put quotes. And our last piece of criteria is looking for snow, presence or absence. So we're doing the same thing that we did before where we looked at the remarks column, which is column E. So raw data, E to E, and we're looking for snow. Okay. So we have 3 pieces of information: month, year, snow. And now we're going to move this over to our actual spreadsheet. And we're going to actually use a trick where, I mean, you could put January and then you can put all the months, but you can also use referencing. Referencing is kind of, remember when we said, oh, look at cell D2, like that first, we specified a specific cell and we did so by clicking on it with our mouse. We can do the same thing with a table that has values filled in, okay? So we're gonna go ahead and start typing. We're gonna put equal sign COUNTIFS, not COUNTIF, COUNTIFS. If you put in COUNTIF, it's only gonna let you put one criteria. It's gonna throw up an error. I think the last raw criteria should be column. Okay, D to D. We will double check that. So our first criteria range is month, January. So we need to navigate over to the raw data sheet. I'm going to make this bigger. Oh, it won't let me make it bigger. Okay, so we're going to select the month, which is in column B, right? So if you look at the formula bar at the top, you have COUNTIFS parentheses, raw data, exclamation mark. The reason there's an exclamation mark is because we're referencing a sheet other than the sheet we're already in. And then it says column B2B. Now, when you're doing this, be very careful and make sure you're putting in columns before you're proceeding to putting in the criteria. If you don't put in a column and you go back to your analysis sheet, it's going to default back to the analysis sheet. So I'm going to show you. So I didn't put a comma in. I'm going back to analysis. And I guess it's because it's the first argument, it kept it. But later on, if I did it, it would switch back to the sheet that I'm currently in. In this case, it didn't. Fine. I will demonstrate it again. So raw data, B2B, is where the months are found. Now we're going to say, look for January. I'm actually just going to click on January. I already typed it in. I don't want to type it again. It's easier this way because I can get it to apply the formula and hopefully update the different types of months without me putting it in. I'm putting another comma in. And if I go ahead and I'm going to zoom in for you all again. Now, if you see Excel helpfully putting in information, what we need to fill in next, it has criteria range 2. So the second piece of our criteria is the year, 1878. So now we're going to go into the raw data sheet again. So raw data and find the year. Okay, so raw data, exclamation point A to A. Now, if I navigate over to analysis, what happens? It switches over to analysis because I didn't put a comma to lock in that reference. So be very careful that you're putting in the comma before moving on to the next piece. We're going to go back to analysis. And now our criteria number 2 is 1878. And we're just clicking on that cell, which is analysis, exclamation mark B1. Last piece of criteria is snow. Comma. Now we need to look for the snow column under raw data. We're going into remarks, and you were right, it is column D to D. Comma, and now we type in snow the way that we did with our COUNTIF formula. So quotes, star, snow, star, quotes, close our parentheses. COUNTIFs raw data. We press enter, it will spit us back out into our table. I'm going to copy and paste it and put it into chat so you can see it. So I know it's long. Okay. Did everyone get that? Let me know with rabbits if you're ready to move on. And you should get a 0. That's fine. January 1878. Maybe there was no snow. Okay. And now I'm going to apply this formula, right? I referenced things. I'm going to go ahead and double click. And now we have all zeros. What's going on? Why is it possible that it just didn't snow that? Yes, we have a question. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that in the raw data, we don't start recording any weather info until July 1st.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that is a great point. Yes, we might have missing data and we didn't look at what our missing data is yet. But yeah, but is it possible that we don't have any snow for the rest of the year? That doesn't seem probable considering we scrolled down to December of 1878 and we had some data. What could be going on here? So we need to look at our formulas. What's happening with them? The best way to look at your formulas is doing control accent. You can see it at the bottom of my screen. It's the key, and on your keyboard, it's the key right next to the 1. If I make this bigger and go ahead and get rid of the magnifying tool, which is being very stubborn. Okay. we can see how the formula is being applied as we move down the cell, right? So if you look at this, and if you click on your formula, it will highlight what the references are. So in this case, A2 refers to January, B1 refers to 1878. But what happens if I click on the next one? We see that A3 refers to February, but now B2 refers back to the cell right above it. So it's moving down, and it is 0 because it is looking for a 0 within 1878. Our references are not staying in place. We were trying to reference B1, but we're actually not referencing B1, we're referencing B2. So what happens, we're going to create a new file, don't save. We have our table, right? And we have our months, Jan, Feb, right? As you go down. And then we have our years, 1878, 1879, so on. As you move the reference down here, the ones on the left-hand side will be accurate because you are the closest to them, right? They will also move down. But these are also going to move down with it, and we don't want that. We want to lock this reference in place. And the way that we make sure that this is always going to point to B2 is we use a $sign, right? A $sign will help lock the reference in place. But we have two pieces of information here. We have B and we have the number 2. Which one do we lock into place? If we lock both into place, it's going to work for us as we're moving it down. But if we want to move in this direction, right? Then right here, C2, which should refer to 1879, is always going to refer back to 1878 if we're locking both of these things in place. So if you think about how the columns are numbered, B, C, D, we want the columns to advance for the year, which means we're locking the number in place. We only want to look at row 2 to find the years. So when we're moving in either direction, up and down, we're only the column letters will keep moving across. Now, if we look at here, we're looking at, this is row, this is column A, row 2. We now want the rows to keep advancing down as we move down the months, right? We want A2 to go to A3, but we don't want for A2 to go into B3. We don't want the columns to advance because then we're going to be referencing our first piece of summed data. So in this case, as we're moving downward here within the rows, we want to lock the column. How did I get each of the cells under B to display the formula? I pressed Control, let me show you on the keyboard. Here's our on-screen keyboard. I pressed Control Accent right here. Both of these at the same time will get you to toggle on the formula. This is also helpful if you're looking at an Excel spreadsheet that maybe someone else showed you or sent to you and you're trying to figure out where the formulas are. This is a good tool to help you check that. Okay. Does this make sense to everyone how we're locking the references? We're trying to lock these months and we're trying to lock the years. Okay.
So Daria,
Yes.
it might help. The way I always think about it is you can have $2 signs and it will lock it to the cell. You can have a leading $sign and it will lock it to the column, or the $sign after the letter to lock it to the row.
Yeah.
I don't know if that helps.
So your letters are always your columns. And if you put a $sign in front of them, you're locking the columns. Your numbers are always your rows. And if you're putting a $sign in front of them, you're locking your rows. If you're putting one by a letter and a number, you're locking both of them. This only locks the column. So as you move down, your rows will advance. This only locks the number, so as you move down, your columns will advance. Okay. There's also another piece of information that we need to lock the reference to. If you look at our formulas, let me move this over a little bit, we see that we have raw data, right? B to B. And if we are moving it downwards, it's staying B to B. But the moment we move this formula over to the next column, it's going to turn into C to C. And that is not going to give us the right results because B to B is where the month appears. And the month only appears in this column within row data. So we need to lock this reference as well. We need to say B to B. And the reason both of these B's are locked is because if we only lock that first one, we're going to end up going into C when we move it over. Okay? So 3 pieces of information that we're locking. We're locking the table months, we're locking the table years, and we are locking where we're referencing that information within the raw data. Let's implement it now that we talked it through. Okay, so B to B, you can either put $signs, or if you click F4, if you toggle it, it will go ahead and put the $signs for you. So we want to lock column B to B because that's only where months appear.
Can you magnify that, Daria?
Yeah, thank you for reminding me. Okay, so now analysis A1, which is the month of January, we need to lock so that the column is locked, but that the rows continue advancing. So if we go ahead and press F4, that locks both the column and the cell. That just locks the row. This locks just the column. Okay. So $sign A2. Next one, we need to lock both of these. Oops, not 4, F4. So I'm pressing F4 as my hotkeys in order to do this. Okay. A to A needs to be locked. The next one is year, 1878. We need to lock the rows. So if I press F4, this locks both of them. This just locks the rows. So it'll only stay within within 1. It will go B1, C1, D1. The last one is snow. We need to lock columns D through D because that's the only place where snow appears. Okay. I just changed this. It does not change everything else. We need to now apply. I need to get rid of this magnification tool. We need to apply this new formula down. We can do that by double clicking, and we can apply it across as well. Okay, and I'm going to get out of the formula view by pressing Control asterisk again. Any questions? I know that was a lot. I'm going to paste this formula into chat for you to put in. Please put rabbits if you are ready to move on. I see one turtle. So I am going to explain it one more time for the benefit of the group. If you look at, and just one more time, and if this doesn't help, please talk to me after this workshop is done. So I'm gonna go ahead and show, no, show the formulas. How to go across columns. Oh, just applying it across columns. What you need to do is you need to select your data, and then you want to click down when you see the black cross and drag across. So you're holding and dragging and then letting go. Okay, great. Okay, so we did the thing, right? We found what the sum is. Unfortunately, or fortunately, my formula is only working if I type in the year manually. Let's talk about that later for the sake of time. I mean, you could type in the formula normally without referencing it. You could have 1878, and then you would just need to update it in these columns. That's a good point if it's formatted as text, because it should be formatting as general or numbers. You can see what you have it formatted as within raw data as well. And I know sometimes Excel can be weird about certain things. Okay, so we found the sums, but as it was helpfully pointed out, we only started collecting data within July of 1878. What about all our missing data, right? Like, do we have a good handle on what our missing data is? Like, we don't really. We don't know what our missing data is. We don't know where it appears. And therefore, we need to make sure that we're taking that under consideration so that we're not drawing false equivalences. Like, are these zeros? Well, we know in this case no data was collected, but are these zeros there because of missing data that's not within the spreadsheet? Or is it there because it's just there was no snow that day? So in order to find that information out, what we need to do is we need to change this formula. So if we change this formula and say, find out the amounts of cells that match on January and 1878, and we can do that by deleting this part of the formula, we suddenly get different information, right? We have how many days within this data set. And so we see that we have 0 days. So there's no data within these this month and this year. And if we apply it further out, we can see where the missing data might be occurring. However, for this data set, I know, because I've looked at this data set extensively, that sometimes you may have a month, a day, and a year present in the data set, but it actually doesn't have any sort of information about the weather. And so this formula gets us so far, but it might give us some false information that there is data when in fact there is not. So if I go and put in this information again, if I say, okay, match on January and the year, and if there is data within the weather remarks, okay, any sort of data, just the presence of information. There is a way to do that within Excel. Remember how for the if formula, we had the quotes by themselves to designate, like, leave it blank? You can use that to look for missing data, right? So this says match on January and the year, and if there is missing data within the weather remarks. But we're interested in seeing, is there any data at all within the weather remarks? And the way that we indicate that is we do angled brackets. And angled brackets are the two carets. So if I go ahead and apply that now, and across, I get slightly different information. I don't know if you saw that change, but it went from 7 and 4 to 4 and 3, and then 23 to 22, which indicates that there is a date for that month and year, but there is no weather remarks. So it's good to make sure when you're dealing with secondary data that you're checking for all pieces of missing data. Okay. Questions? Let me know if you're ready to move on by putting in a rabbit. Or if you need me to explain that again. Okay. Seeing all rabbits, I'm going to proceed. There is another way to generate this table. The other way is to use a pivot table. Disclaimer, I am not a huge fan of pivot tables because I think sometimes it is very difficult to replicate the results that you are interested in. However, in this case, it works, and I would be remiss to not show you. So if you go and navigate into the raw data, I know Jason was laughing at me because he is a fan of pivot tables. So I guess we're both biases are represented here. If you go and click on Insert and you click Pivot Table and you get this menu, you can create a pivot table. It will have the range selected. That's great. In a new worksheet, that's fine. Press OK. And you will see that you get this blank sheet with pivot table fields, and it appears as sheet 5 in my case. So what we need to do is we need to populate this blank sheet with the information we're interested in to get a pivot table out of. So if you remember the analysis tab that we just did, we're going to exactly replicate it. So our rows in this case were our months. So we're going to grab a month and we're going to drag it over to the rows. And you can see that they appear right here. And then we're going to take the years and we're going to drag it over to columns. You can see that they appear here. And then we're going to use snow. We need to use the presence or absence cell for this. It's not going to work, unfortunately, for text the way that our formulas did. Our formula worked whether or not we had that. If we just had the remarks column. This case, you need to have a number. So we're going to move snow over to values. And it automatically defaults to sum of snow. And that's what you want. If it defaults to anything else for you, you're going to need to click on that drop-down menu and click value field setting and change it to sum. Okay? So remember, sum was 1 or 0, presence or absence. So we're getting the sum. And you should get the same exact information that we just got using our analysis tab. How are we feeling? We feeling okay about that? Please send me the rabbits if you're feeling okay. Or thumbs up. Those are also great. Awesome. Great. So, sorry, can you go over again? Sure, of course. So what we're going to do is we need to, you get a blank sheet and you need to essentially tell Excel what you're interested in getting the results of. So we're taking and thinking about this analysis tab and how we had months on the left-hand side, which are the rows, right? And years, which are in the columns at the top as our headers. And so we're clicking on what the fields we're interested in, and we're dragging them to the areas below. So we're clicking on year and dragging it to columns, clicking on month and dragging it to rows.
Sorry, I just missed the where I was having trouble like finding the pivot table function.
Sure.
Just starting it off. Yeah, thank you.
So you need to go back to the data you want to pivot on. And so in this case, raw data. And we're going into the top of the ribbon that says insert. And now we're going to click on pivot table at the very left of that ribbon. And you get this create pivot table. You'll notice that Excel has designated a range. That's all of our data. That's perfectly fine for us. And we're going to want it to be placed in a new worksheet, and we're pressing OK. And it creates a new worksheet for us. Yep. And then you're just dragging, like I said, year to column, month to row.
Yeah, thank you. I was trying to do that from a blank sheet and it like wasn't letting me.
Oh, it's okay.
Thanks.
Okay, great. Well, in this case, we're getting down to the pointy end. I'm gonna do my best to keep going forward. So we're done with this spreadsheet. We did what we wanted with the historical data set. So we can go ahead and move on to our other worksheet. And there's no guarantee we're gonna get through all of it. I'm gonna do my best. Okay, we're gonna go into data contemporary weather analysis. And we're going to enable editing at the top. Okay, and if you remember, this was a long time ago. It's over an hour ago at this point, 2 hours ago. If you remember, you had two things that we needed to clean in this data set. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. We have this, which you don't have the year for this, unfortunately. And it's not split up in a way that we can leverage it easily, right? Because our historical data set was split up into year, month, and day. So this needs to be fixed. And then we have observations. We have light snow, haze. We could create a column that shows presence and absence the exact same way we did for historical data sets. Or we can skip it if we're going to not use a pivot table, right? If we want to repeat the process the same way we did the analysis sheet. We don't need to go over this. I feel like you all have seen how to do this. However, we will go over this first column, how to fix the date. So if you look at this column here, you see that it is in order, which is great. We can leverage that. It doesn't have any years, but we know that it started from 2018. So what we need to do is we need to create a new column. We're going to insert, and we're going to call this column year. Now I'm going to go ahead and cell A2, put 2018, because that is when our data set started. And we know it goes in order, and we're going to leverage that information. We're going to apply it all the way down for now. And now we need to find where 2018 ends. And the best way to do that is leverage the information that keeps repeating when 2018 ends, or whenever a year ends, which is December 31st, because that's always going to be there within our data set. We can use conditional formatting to identify that information. So if you highlight all of cell B and you go into conditional formatting, my magnifying tool, conditional formatting, highlight cell rules, the same way that we did for snow, right? Text that contains December 31st. And press OK. Then we have, if we scroll all the way down, and you're not going to want to sort it because it's structured right now. We don't want to get rid of the structure. We have December 31st appear here. January 1st is now going to be 2019. Okay. And we're going to apply that all the way down. And we're going to do the same thing because December 31st is highlighted for the next year. So essentially, we're just filling in the year because it wasn't filled in for us. I wish there was a better way to do this within Excel. I feel like this is the easiest way if you're missing that year, because it's really hard to put that back in. So would you do the 2018 again? Sure. So we start off with 2018 and we put it into the first cell, and we navigate over to our cursor turns into a black cross, and we apply it all the way down. Do you have a question? Is it repeat what I did?
No, I'm just looking at right where the year turns over to 2019, and I'm seeing a couple missing dates. And I'm wondering if we should take that into account if there's any missing December 31st or
Yeah,
I don't know.
there aren't any for this data set, and the reason data is missing is for a different reason. So it's contemporary data, so it's not recorded by humans, right? Because in the historical data set, you had a lighthouse keeper going in and being like, what's the weather like today? This is not recorded by humans in the same way. The reason data is missing within this spreadsheet is if there was no weather, like if there was no precipitation. And so we don't have to worry about the data being missing. And in this case, it works out for us because December 31st is not missing. But I guess you could also highlight multiple days. You didn't have to highlight December 31st. You could have done, December 29th or December 28th towards the end of the year. That will help you indicate where that year changes. But that is a good point. It works out in our case, but it might have not worked out in future cases. So we apply the 2018 all the way down, and then we use conditional formatting on the day, going into the ribbon, conditional formatting, highlighting cell roles equal to end of 2020. Does not have a 31st. Okay, well, we can easily do, December 29th again. And that will give us two indicators in case we have a missing date. So then we scroll all the way down to where we have our conditional formatting, December 31st, and we change it to 2019. And then we scroll all the way down to the next year. And we keep repeating the process until we get to that. So 2020 here. Apply it down, and then we go over to 2021. Oh, yep, you're right, 30th. Oh, for some reason it didn't apply to the 31st. I wonder if I didn't have it selected. Ah, yeah. For some reason I had it set equal to a number instead of December 31st, December 29th. But if I had done it correctly, then it would have actually worked. And that could, you're right, there is no December 31st, 2020, but doing another date towards the end of the year can give you that indicator. So we change this to 2021, and then we scroll all the way down and change it to 2022. And that's our last year. Okay, so we have our year settled, but now we have this format for date that doesn't really make sense. So what we're gonna do now is we're going to actually separate this information into its own columns using the data text to column feature. Sometimes when you read in a spreadsheet and it's in a weird format, you will need to do this anyway. The thing is, it will overwrite any data you have next to it. So you're going to need to insert columns before you do that function. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to insert 4 columns. So I'm highlighting 4 columns C to F, right-clicking and pressing insert. So now I have 4 blank columns. Now I'm highlighting column B, and I'm pressing, let me do the magnifying tool again so you can see, because I know the ribbon is very small. I'm going data, text to column, and we're going to do delimited text, okay? Delimited means there's a specific character that we're putting in, that we're using to separate the text. So in this case, we're using commas to separate our text. Not commas, sorry, we're using spaces. And so we see Monday, comma, January 1. We don't really care that there's a comma next to Monday because we're not using that piece of information anyway. And then when we pressed finish, we see that that information has been populated. into the columns. So we can go ahead and delete column B. We don't need the day of the week. We want to change this to month, and we want to change this to day. Okay. If you notice, this one is fine. There's no spaces. Does this one have any spaces? No. Okay, great. So the other thing that we're going to need to do, we can get rid of columns D through E because they're blank. Those were just there for us in case something went wrong, so it didn't overwrite our data. We're going to either need to change these months to the full month, or we're just going to have to, if we set things up, just keep in mind it's an abbreviation. Either one works. If you're not combining these data sets together, the contemporary and the historical, it should be fine. And now you have things separated out by year, month, and day. Any questions for me about moving data from text to columns? Good to go? Please send rabbits. Okay, great. So I'm not going to go over observations. Like I said, you all have done it before with the previous data set. I think you'll be able to find the sum of snow. You can just, do that on your own as homework to test your understanding. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to flip back to the concluding slide because we're almost at time, and I do want us to talk a little bit about, like the conclusions that we found since we weren't able to do that final analysis. Oh, not demonstration. Let's do new slide. Okay, discussion. Okay, so if we went ahead and did all of the analysis the way, if we had time to do it for the contemporary years, we might end up with a chart that looks something like this, where you have the months from at the left-hand side and the years, and the sum of the snow days for the past and contemporary. And if you look at the total historical snow days, you see it's 99, and you see his contemporary snow days is 433. So 5% of days with snow in the past and 24% of days of snow right now in the past 5 years. However, as we looked at missing data, we found that there is quite some missing data because it is a lighthouse keeper, a human being who is going out with a journal every single day and was recording the snow or the weather. And there are chances that he was sick or that he had other obligations or that life got in the way. It is very difficult to be consistent if you are a single human being collecting missing data. So when we actually look and see the missing data within our data set, we see that all of a sudden we're missing 577 days. So we might have thought that a difference between 99 days and 433 days was enough to make some sort of conclusion about our data set. We could have been compelled to be like, wow, climate change has really impacted us. And it's not to say that it hasn't, but our data set cannot give us that conclusion, because even if we look to see only the missing days between October and April, which is historically where the snow days had fallen, we're still out 424 days of missing data. And if we add that to 99, we're about the same as the contemporary data. And so we cannot make those conclusions. However, that doesn't mean our data is invalid, right? It's just something that you need to look at every time you're reusing secondary data, because you don't know what is missing. You don't know just on the surface whether or not you can actually use that data for the purposes you want it to use it for, because it is data collected for a different purpose. So perhaps maybe we can take a subset of this data, right? We can make some more definite conclusions if we look at parts of it that don't have any missing data. Only maybe the 4 years and only in the second half of the year. Or maybe just a year comparison, though maybe that doesn't give us as much information as we wanted it to. Doesn't mean this data set is useless, but you do need to contextualize it so that you aren't leading people astray if you are writing conclusion, trying to make generalizable conclusions about this data set. So because there is information that's not captured that we couldn't capture. So yeah, that's pretty much just be very cautious when you are taking something else that already exists and you're trying to use it for a different purpose. Any questions about this takeaway? I could go into more depth, but for the purposes of time, I'm going to keep going. This is the last slide. You don't have Post-it notes, unfortunately. You were not in person. However, I am very happy you were here. I will be here for an hour after this workshop if you want to talk to me about things I didn't cover, or if you'd like me to repeat something or show something, or if you'd like to share your screen so we can troubleshoot. It would be very helpful for me if you could please fill out a Qualtrics survey, and you can tell me what went well with this workshop and what could be improved. I do look at your feedback and I do make improvements every single time, and that would be very helpful. I'm also available for appointments and by email if you would like to talk to me about your specific project. You can also talk to me right now, that's also fine. But thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you around.